Good evening. I'm Scott Dodson, Executive Director of the Library of Virginia Foundation. I want to welcome you to our second virtual event, celebrating the 2020 Library of Virginia Annual Literary Awards celebration. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to recognize the generosity of the donors who made the library's work possible. Most notably this evening, Dominion Energy is the lead sponsor of the 2020 Literary Awards. The Library of Virginia Foundation's work is to find the vital resources that help the library collect, preserve, and share the stories of Virginia. We couldn't do it without you. Tonight I ask that those of you watching consider supporting the library by contributing towards our $15,000 challenge by either calling 804-692-3592 or visiting the link on your screen in the comments. On behalf of all of us at the Library of Virginia, I thank you in advance for your support. If you have any questions this evening, please leave them in your Facebook or YouTube comment sections, and we'll be happy to answer those later in the program as well. And now I'd like to welcome tonight's moderator, Poet Laureate of Virginia, Luisa A. Igloria, and Poetry Award finalists, K Aline, David Huddle, and Ben Kingsley. Thank you. Dr. Igloria?
Thank you, Scott. Good evening, friends. It's such a pleasure to be part of tonight's panel, honoring three poets whose beautiful books are the finalists in this year's Library of Virginia Literary Awards in the poetry category. And what I'll do is I will introduce our three poets in turn, and then we can kick off a conversation. But before that, I will be inviting each of them to read maybe two poems from their finalist collection. So in alphabetical order, I would like to introduce our three finalists, starting with K Aline. Hi, Lauren. Lauren, yeah, hi. Lauren hails from Trinidad and Tobago. Her poetry, fiction, and nonfiction have been widely published in journals and anthologies, including The Atlantic, Women's Studies Quarterly, Crab Orchard Review, among many others. She is the author of Difficult Fruit from People Tree Press and Honeyfish, which is the finalist book this year. Her work has received many honors, most recently the Philip Freund Alumni Prize for Excellence in Publishing from Cornell University, the Green Rose Prize from New Issues Press, the Split This Rock Poetry Prize, and she has received honors too, including the Picador Guest Professorship in Literature at the University of Leipzig in Germany, as well as an Iowa Arts Council Fellowship. The journal Ithaca Lit named its annual prize the K Aline Difficult Fruit Poetry Prize. And she currently is Associate Professor of English at James Madison University and also Assistant Director of the Furious Flower Poetry Center and Editor-in-Chief of The Flight and the Fiddle. So welcome, Lauren.
Thank you so much. I want to say thank you to the Library of Virginia and the judges who awarded Honeyfish this incredible honor. I'm really excited to be one of three finalists. I know a lot of poets in the Commonwealth, and I think it's just an honor to be selected. I want to say congratulations to my fellow finalists, and you should get their books, which are beautiful. And thank you, Luisa, and I look forward to talking to you. I'm going to read three short poems from Honeyfish. As you mentioned, I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, and so the first one sort of thinks about, how does one wind up here in Harrisonburg, Virginia?
Lauren, before you read, could you also I will do the introductions before each reader reads a small selection, but would you also tell us, among other things, how this work came to be and how maybe what the shaping impulses were?
Yeah.
Even if you think that, did you wind up with a book that at the outset you thought you wanted to write?
I often say that I don't write books, I write poems, and then there's enough of them that maybe I think I should start looking to see what I've been up to. And I was talking about being from Trinidad, and a place is very much one of the shaping influences of Honeyfish. I think a lot about what it means to, you know, I'm an immigrant. I travel. I've visited 26 countries in the world, right? And I love that idea of movement and engagement with cultures and histories. And, you know, but I'm also very keenly aware of doing that as an embodied person, right? And so the idea of what one brings when your body enters a space and how that encounter shapes you, how you shape the space that you enter, is definitely, you know, a lot of these poems take place in Greece, they take place in Trinidad, they take place in Dubuque, Iowa, where I lived before I moved to Harrisonburg 4 years ago. And so that, I think, processing ideas of place and what it means to be in place, what it means to be in an American space, you know, certainly is at a heart, I think, of the collection.
Right. And such a relevant set of questions that you start bringing up. Would you like to read a few
Sure.
before I introduce the other two poets?
Yes, absolutely. So again, thinking of that idea of place, and certainly in the conversations that that are going on at the moment, the first poem I'm going to read is Visa Villanelle, and I think it'll be self-explanatory, but the villanelle is a form that has repeated lines, so you'll hear that repeating. Visa Villanelle. First, the gathering of proof, your life's story reduced to a paper jam of required documents, evidence of the right shape of your history. Surrender every expectation of privacy, release the statements, provide your fingerprints, prove you have nothing to hide, your life's story unremarkable in its mundane trajectory of dream, desire, struggle, overcoming, testament to the harmless shape of your history. Leave home at midnight. Drive through the wee hours to arrive at the embassy door first with your gathered proof, your rehearsed story. Stand in the chilled, street-lit dark. Pray the rosary. Repeat again and again to still your heavy beating heart. You have the evidence, all the right forms. This is but a footnote in your history. Dawn. Daylight opens the day like a key. Wipe the weary from your eyes. Enter. State your intent. Offer the proof of your life. Tell its story. Provide evidence. Give it the shape that will become your history. The second poem is called Variations in Blue, and it's in conversation with the poet Frank X. Walker, which provides the epigraph when Frank says, I don't know how to swim, I'm an island girl. I was like, what? And then he said, there were no pools for Black folk when I was coming up. Variations in Blue. In sleep's 3D theater, home, a green island surrounded by the blue of ocean. Zoom to the heart, see the Kuva swimming pool filled with us, Black children shrieking our joy in a haze of sun. Our lifeguard, Rodney, his skin flawless and gleaming black as fresh oil, his strut along the pool's edge, his swoon-worthy smile. Daddy, a beach ball bellied Poseidon, droplets diamonding his afro, my brother hollering as he jumps into his bright blue fear, his return to air gasping and triumphant. And there, the girl I was, dumpling thick and sun-brown, stripped down to the red two-piece suit my mother had made by hand, afloat in the blue bed of water, the blue sky beaming above. When I wake up, I'm in America, where Dorothy Dandridge emptied a pool with her pinky once, and in Texas, a Black girl's body draped in its hopeful, tasseled bikini struck earth instead of water, a policeman's blue-clad knees pinning her back, her indigo wail a siren. I want this to be the dream, but I'm awake, and in this place where the only blue named home is a song, and we are meant to sink, to sputter, to drown. And I'll close with a short poem called Ode to the Fish as Weather Vane, which came about because I was at the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown looking at a fish that was mounted as a weather vane. You were built for a different blue, for oceans, rivers, clear complexes of glass, but here you are, hoisted among the clouds, neighbor to the stars, your fins redefining wings. Say flight. Say sky is ocean by another name. Say biology is one order of being, but imagination is another. How you undo cliché with your unlikely grace, slip through the clumsy nets limits would knit around your bizarre existence. Token, they whisper, freak. But how you withstand the fickle transformations of weather, read the revolution wind scripts onto your body, learn to move in its midst. Say, evolve. Say, the first order of being is survival. Say, these gills will become lungs and testify, say, thrive in any element and name it possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Beautiful reading. When I read that poem with the epigraph, I said, I can so relate. I still have not learned to swim. I'm going to introduce our next finalist now. This is David Huddle. David is originally from Ivanhoe in Virginia. He teaches at the Bread Loaf School of English and the Rainier Writing Workshop. He is the author of over 20 novels, short story collections, and volumes of poetry. His fiction, poetry, and essays have appeared in The American Scholar, Esquire, Harper's, The New Yorker, Poetry, Shenandoah, and elsewhere. And his recent books include Dream Sender, and this poetry collection, My Surly Heart, and another novel called My Immaculate Assassin. So, David, before I ask you to read a small sampling of poems from your finalist book, would you tell us similarly something about how this book began? I mean, I just can't help thinking about how evocative all of your titles are. Honeyfish, My Surly Heart, a surly heart. I mean, Colonize Me for Ben. So I know that I must have gone through at least 5 title changes with each manuscript of mine. So, but it's not just about titles, right? So tell us a little bit about where this book began and what its shaping impulses were before you read.
Okay. And with this book, I started doing something that I hadn't done before, which was to set forth a question, and quite often a really simple question, and then try to write a serious poem in response to that. And then I also wanted to use a lot of the epigraphs that I have sort of taken from various people who've said really wonderful things that interested me. So I feel like my job is, of course, to write the poem, but then I like to be responding to something else that helps me get to be a better poet. And I think the first one that I would like to read, which is the first one in the book, is a pretty good example of that. The title of it is Where Do You Come From? Which I think most of us have been asked that question and have had to come up with answers for it. It's one thing to answer it publicly or socially, and another thing to answer it for yourself. So that's pretty much what happens here with this poem. Where do you come from? The cosmic speck of me joined the universe by way of my mother and my father, my brothers and my grandmother Acres, granddaddy and grandmama Huddle, her kitchen, his tool shop, his dusty office, the help, Harvey Sawyer, Monkey Dunford, Thelma, Lucy, Uncle Will Washington, Peaks, workhorses, cows, chickens, a mule, the food they ate, the way they talked, my dad's music, my mother's reading books aloud to us boys, the Withville radio station, daffodils, lilacs, cigarette smoke, the weather humble bees, my grandparents fighting at Sunday dinner, my parents' deep care for us and each other. I also believe that poems work best for me if I can carry them along, and then when I get to a point where I want to end the poem, I can have it show me something that I hadn't seen before. So the fact that my grandparents were really terrible fighters at Sunday dinner, And my own parents were really sweet with each other their whole lives, as far as I can tell. So that's a kind of a, what should I say, a contradiction in my upbringing. The second poem I'd like to read is a poem that has 3 epigraphs in it. One is from Walker Evans, who I think is a photographer, was a photographer. And Walker Evans said, "A man who has faith, intelligence, and cultivation will show that in his work." And then Hunter S. Thompson had this to say. He says, "I hate to advocate drugs, alcohol, violence, or insanity to anyone, but they've always worked for me." And then John Cheever has this, which comes out of a wonderful short story called The World of Apples. He says, "The welcome universe, the rain that sounded through the world of apples had vanished. Filth was his destiny, his best self, and he began with relish a long ballad called The Fart That Saved Athens." When this cultivated man sits down to explicate a particularly exquisite Henry James paragraph, after hours of stillness, he understands he prefers silence to the tepid brilliance of James's prose. A man who loathes himself sits down to chronicle his fistfights, his betrayals of friends, family, and many a good woman, then finds himself humming Amazing Grace and writing prayers for prisoners on death row in America. In her writing classes, Deborah Eisenberg says again and again, the sentence, the sentence, the sentence. Impartial, merciless, it will have its way with you. In the chamber of diction and syntax, the truth of you shall be revealed. Artist, monk, assassin, penitent, athlete, nurse, dancer, perfect fool of a president. And the last poem I would like to read takes its title from a wonderful composition by Duke Ellington called Mood Indigo. And I learned from Wikipedia that Ellington voices the trombone right at the top of the instrument's register and the clarinet at the very lowest. Mood Indigo. This morning's end of April shower grants me a glimpse of a goldfinch on the bare limb of my neighbor's birch tree. The gray blue sky releases raindrops that puddle on the stones just beyond my French doors, helping the grass go greener by the minute. Ellington's composition might have begun sounding its meditative joy in his mind's ear on a morning just like this. Others may call this a gloomy day, but my 6 years have helped me to recognize what I need when I see it coming. My death dancing alone in its blue gown. I know just what to say. Oh, there you are, my dear. May I join you? The poem can't help telling you that says I'm 76, but I'm 78 now. So there you go. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I love the reading that you gave, these poems steeped in the richness of memory. And I would like to call on our third finalist to introduce him. Our third finalist is Benjamín Naka-Hasebe Kingsley, or Ben, simply. And his bio reads that he is not the Ben Kingsley best known for his Academy Award-winning role as Mahatma Gandhi. This Ben, supposedly, is a touch less famous, having not acted since his third grade debut as the Undertaker in Music Man. He is an Appalachian author and Kundiman alum, and he is a recipient of the Provincetown Fine Arts Work Center and Tickner Fellowships. He is of the Onondaga Nation of Indigenous Americans in New York. His first, second, and third books, 2018, 19, and 21, in order, include Not Your Mama's Melting Pot, Colonize Me, which is up for this award, and Demos. His recent work can be found in numerous anthologies and journals, including Poetry, Field, the Georgia Review, Canyon Review, among others. And full disclosure, he is a colleague in the MFA Creative Writing program at Old Dominion University. Yes. So Ben, similarly as the others have done, would you read a small sampling of works from your finalist collection and maybe talk a little something about, the kinds of poems you write, what kind of book you were trying to arrive at in Colonize Me?
Yeah, sure thing. And let me just start by saying a huge thank you to everyone involved, Scott, Don, Lauren, David, and of course, you, our illustrious poet laureate. And let me give a quick shout out, since we were doing shout outs for Maps for Migrants and Ghosts.
Oh, thank you. I did not pay him to do this.
Yeah, I am not paid to do this, but I will definitely take payment. A little bit about the formation of the book. David had mentioned contradictions in his upbringing. And I would definitely say a hearty amen whenever it comes to how I was formed as a human and how that informs all of my work. I embody many seeming contradictions. I might even say multitudes if it wouldn't make you, cringe too much. But in all seriousness, I don't fit neatly into our intersectional hierarchy. My mother, like you mentioned, is half Onondaga, an indigenous tribe in upstate New York, and she's also half Japanese. My father is half Cuban, and he's also half Appalachian. Two of my grandfathers fought for America in World War II, but my great uncle on my Japanese side was a kamikaze pilot. But his brother, my grandfather, Naka-Hasebe, was actually imprisoned for writing anti-World War II poetry. It was a poem called See the Warhorse Cry. So this is a lineage with a lot of contradiction, and this first poem tries to display what might be united in me rather than, say, divided. It's called Of What America? How to Assemble 1, a Native, 2, Nippon, 3, Cubana Body, in 4, Appalachia. My burnt body hangs crisscross over beach dunes, below where family gathers, children's ringing, sand laps toys tangled in teenage lust, the skin consciousness, potential of everyone eyeing one another in sun-bursted bottoms. There is nothing here but the bliss of this day. And so I think on death, hanging out over the Pacific, so many dead. Mi familia, watashi, kazoku, kawaii, ya, my kinfolk. There are 4 ways to name the century of dying in me. What passions grew a mixed-skinned boy who would plant his body here and witness a happy beach rooted in the smile of so much untilled history. Somewhere far, the open ocean ferried my padre between Cuba and Miami, swam pescado inside each swell of lung. Unmoored, he said, until his mind fell into love with the woman who fled America's internment camps, a pregnant Nippon daughter's flight from San Diego to Somerset, PA. Tegami kakuyo, I'll write you letters. She touched the shovel-shaped incisors of a Native American boy whose floorboards were still booting the re-education, each Hodenoda song of de facto fathers. My Onondaga origin bowed beneath the whip of whiteness lashed. He laid down love for my kin, who ran skinny rail, lines what split Appalachian silt and marl. My feet saddle all the loosed mud of so many continents, where everyone is gone some days, and some days they aren't. Because I believe on days like this, with a mouthful of expiring sun, the potential of a small beginning, what sustains a soul across imagined borders, what finds tortured bodies their song of forward rejoicing. And I have one more for you. This final poem is from the collection, and it feels now in 2020, given the plight of our country, more prescient than ever. It's about Jason Pirro, a 14-year-old Chippewa boy who was shot by a cop once in the arm and once in the chest, just outside his home on Bad River Reservation. This is a rough poem for me to read, but I think it's so important right now, and thank you so much for listening. It's called I Can't Close My Eyes Without Seeing Jason Pirro's Body. Boys like us don't make national news. That's what we tell each other, fleeing the long blue arms of police LEDs. Our high-top Reeboks kissed gravel, miles of central Pennsylvania street. Us, not old enough to have kissed a lover. Boys like us, cops shoot and ask questions never. We laughed, we ran, we laughed, we hollered pig, as if it was just another pickup game of basketball on blacktop. We were so young. How young is too young to teach a boy never turn his index finger and thumb into the hammered steel of a gun. You might die. I breathed for decades, older and older, and now when I close my eyes, I can see Jason Pirro isn't with us boys, us running from cops. Jason is at home. He was a teddy bear, said his grandpa. He teased his little nephews once in a while, but that was the meanest part he had. Jason Pirro is in his front yard, making the best of our Bad River Reservation, turning porch boughs into a drum set, each stick cracking stained wood. He imagines making it all the way to high school. Drumline. And here comes that cop with report of a man carrying a knife. And here is Jason drumming, and here there will be no justice for death. No video evidence of Jason's dying, just this one that plays out endlessly in my head. The greatest horror writers know it's worse when you can't see the monster. Jaws that catch, claws that bite, hidden just off screen. In Onondaga, our clan mother says, Kasentha, I hide something, Akriekon, in my heart. But tonight I am done with hiding. Jason Pirro was shot once in the shoulder and once in the heart, and my heart beats faster the longer I sleep, the longer I close my eyes, the longer we hide. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ben. So, friends, in the banner at the bottom of your screen, you can see the link where you can purchase these beautiful, powerful poems, these books that will live with you for a long time, promise. I know that also the audience is able to type in questions, whether you're watching the show on YouTube or on Facebook. So please enter your questions there, and someone will help me read them out so that our friends can address your questions. First, to kick that off, though, I'm struck by how all of you have spoken in your own way about this idea of complexity, more than complexity, contradiction, and maybe how that is sort of like something that we felt even more since we went into, the pandemic. All this time, it's what, 8 months now, 9, almost a year. I wonder how writing poems, or maybe writing the poems that you do, is something that helps to process everything that's going on, which is also very contradictory. There are all these terrible things that happen, but there's also so many other moments of equally unbearable beauty. So maybe could you talk about that a little bit and how you address it in your poems?
Should I go? I mean, I think I'm a person that I'm a writer by definition because I think through words and through language. And so for me, the page is a space that allows me to figure out what words I can wrap around the things I'm feeling, right? Usually inside is like this, you know. But then when that effort, that work of translating that into language, and then also allowing language to help you shape that, I think is definitely a huge part of what writing means and does for me. And I think, you know, the poem is a particularly useful space for that because, right, it's so inherently, it's an inherently contradictory form, right? You know, that mechanical but also mysterious. And so I think that tension helps us to deal with being human, right? We're bodies and we're something other than bodies. And I think that's one of the tensions we kind of bump into over and over. And I think that poems and writing help me to engage.
Yeah, absolutely. Is that something which is ineffable? Is there with the language which asks you to be thoroughly grounded at the same time? So, yeah. What about for you, Ben and David?
Yeah,
What's your experience with
I
this?
think I have probably like a short, sweet answer. My grandmother, Matsumi Hasebe, she passed away whenever I was 3, but I will never forget her telling me to tend to the part of the garden which you can touch. And, you know, for me, there are so many things I'm awful at, right? You know, I can't do anything with plumbing, any kind of, you know, classic work, carpentry, nothing, right? But I can handle words a little bit and I can move them around, you know, brain work over so many other kinds of work. So poetry is kind of my, you know, small contribution to the kind of global garden that I'm able to touch in, you know, some way and hopefully affect for the better.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you, David.
I wish I could take both of you together, what you've just said, and use it in my poetry, but I can't do that. So I sometimes have to remind myself that really there's a basic reason why I try to write a poem or write any poem, and that is that I need to move towards some kind of revelation, which quite often doesn't happen, and the poem goes and sits in a dark desk drawer if it doesn't happen. But if the poem kind of reaches out and tells me something I didn't know when I started writing it, I can only be grateful for it and be proud of it. So that's what I would like it to do for me.
Yeah, thank you. Well, as a poet of color, as an immigrant writer, I'm always interested in these themes of origin and history and identity. Place, also, you've spoken so eloquently about place in your poems, but especially this idea of carrying forward, even sometimes unconsciously, these histories that have been shaped by, you know, other times and other hands, other people apart from us. So even those who may not have had firsthand experience of that legacy, they carry it unconsciously forward into their present day lives. And so I wonder, what do you think poetry does with that sense of both legacy and maybe the way to attune oneself? It's a very difficult thing to kind of think about even overcoming. I'm not sure I can even talk about overcoming something like that. But how do you deal? You know, and how, again, in poetry, does poetry teach us strategies for maybe carrying these things so that they don't feel as heavy, maybe? If that makes sense.
I can keep going because I feel like you're summoning language in me even as you ask these wonderful questions. You know, first of all, I don't think there's anybody outside of that dynamic you described, right? Like whether a person is marginalized or privileged, if a person is a native or an immigrant, like the matrix includes us all, right? And so, and what I think is particularly kind of important to think about is the way that language participates in that carrying forward, right? And so words are carrying so much history. every time. And what we get to do as poets is sort of lay out all the possible hidden connotations of language in a way, and then that's, you know, we have to lay it bare before we can change it, right? And so in the poems, in the manipulation of that language, in the breaking and restructuring and sort of minute attention to things that we sort of just say, right? We sort of slow it down, we put it on the page, we look at it, we put a microscope on it, and that helps us to see what's underneath, what's around, and then helps us to rearrange it, right? That's where the possibility of changing it comes from. And so I think the language has in it both history and futurity, right? It's history and possibility, and that those are always engaging each other. That's where some of the tension and the heart of the poem comes from. And so I just, that's how we participate, right? I think in the building of the things that we have to live in.
Right. I like what you say about possibility connected to futurity, because, you know, this can turn into an obsession that, you know, can drive you crazy if you don't find ways to mediate all these different energies in you too. David and Ben, would you like to address that too?
Yeah, sure. I have two quick things. I love what you said about tradition carrying that kind of history forward. In my tribe, we actually have a kind of creation myth of the Tadoroho, right? The one who carries the council fire, right? The one who keeps tradition alive. And I kind of really try to kind of embody that in much of my work. Also in Japanese, we just had Kishibashi at the Odi Literary Festival, and he spoke about the Japanese tradition of kind of everything that you touch and kind of put your heart, your effort into, whether you're making a chair or a poem or a song, you kind of transfer a part of yourself, your spirit, right, your kind of soul into that object. And I hope that my poems kind of carry a little bit of that with them.
There's a kind of poem that I would like to write, but that I never have, and I doubt that I have much more kind of possibility for doing it. But there's Elizabeth Bishop poem about loss, which is a Villanelle. And a Villanelle, as you know, is a very kind of proper and rigid, demanding kind of form. But that poem, I think she came back to it again and again and again. And what thrills me about it is that at the very end of it, you know that there's that last line where she sort of says, "So blankety blank black, write it, exclamation mark." There's something about loss that comes after that. And my sense is that she earned the right to mutilate that last line in that really thrilling, beautiful way by holding on to it for so long and making it yield what it had to tell her. That's what I got to say.
Yeah, that's a great example. I think I'm getting a message that we're starting to get a few questions from our audience. So maybe...
can I respond to David real quick too, because I love that Villanelle by Bishop, right? The art of losing isn't hard to master, even though it looks like write it like disaster. And I think, again, that's one of the ways in which, that rooted groundedness of the loss that is so palpable in that Villanelle is there. And that it carries forward, like every time we read it, it's almost like it's happening again, but then it takes us through that revelation, so we also are able to move forward, right? So it propels us, even as it roots us in a loss that has happened in the moment. And I just love temporality and the way that poems can play with time. And again, that idea that you were talking about too, like sort of bringing the history, pushing us forward, and also forcing us weirdly to be present all at the same time. And I think that poem is an excellent example of that. I love that poem.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. Here's the first question from our audience. Joanne Gabin says to you, first of all, the readings are powerful. There's so much beauty, even in the language we cry in. Talk about how you manage that contradiction. And I guess it's sort of like an offshoot of all the things we've been talking about so far. But that part, so much beauty even in the language we cry in. Would someone like to respond to that?
I'm staying quiet, guys.
Well, I will speak up and say that I like beauty in language too, but I like other things than beauty, and I like a few poems that are really are pretty the opposite of beautiful. They are tough, and I would say that that is another kind of poetry, another kind of way of going about things. I too often have to speak with people who want to think that poetry is pretty stuff, and in my opinion, it can be pretty. But the poems that I respond to are not often all that pretty.
Mm-hmm. And all of you, I think, have written elegies. And I think, Lauren, your book is particularly suffused with this particular type of poem. And the other poets here, you also use some kind of formal constraint. Does that maybe help to answer this question about what to do about this language that contains both tears and laughter, or tears and...
Yeah, I mean, I think if we think about, what it means to be human, that's a contradiction we live in constantly, right? That idea of beauty. I do think there's always, certainly writing elegies, and a lot of Honeyfish has, elegies to victims of police brutality. And there is, I think, a question always of the aesthetic object of the poem that is trying at the same time to confront, describe, address a brutal social act, right? A social injustice, and that tension of not wanting to make the violence beautiful, right? To make it sort of pornographic in excerpting from its material and political and lived ramifications, but also at the same time that responsibility or a sort of nature of the poem, right? I don't know that the poem works if it's an ugly thing, right? It has to, in its form, inhabit beauty, but also that beauty becomes a bridge or a way to walk into the less beautiful things. And I think that, again, we don't resolve that contradiction. We get better at living in it. We get better at dealing with it. I think that practice is one we work out, taking out into the world as well. I don't know.
Right. Ben, would you?
Yeah. Definitely. One of the first things that I teach my students with poetry is, conflict is everything, tension is everything, right? You want to continually complicate the poem. So they kind of want to get as far away from the, didactic, right? Meaning meant to instruct, or away from the teachy, away from the kind of, preachy, right? They don't want the black, white, right? Very, very obvious, very, very clear, right? I kind of want the waters muddied, right? I want those, shades of gray, but I feel like that's been stolen now, saying shades of gray, but forgive me, you know what I'm saying? They're trying to kind of smash two different things together, right? The villains that we love, they consider themselves to be heroes, right? We want that kind of 3D-ness in the poem rather than that kind of, easy, uncomplicated, unmoved cardboard cutout.
Yeah, and what you all are saying, Lauren, you used the word walking into it and walking it. I think more than the idea of arriving at a moment of huge insight at the end of the poem, which sometimes my students in workshop call, you drop a knowledge stone at the end of the poem, and it has this huge sound, which is very loud, but also very discomfiting. So the way to do that, the balance of that, I think, is the beauty of what some of the things we do in poetry can show us. There is a second question here from Laura Rumi. And the question is, have young people, both in high school and in college, reached out to you during the pandemic to ask how to get started writing poems, how they could get started writing poems during the pandemic?
Well, I will speak to that, even though I haven't had anybody ask me about it recently. But one of the things that seems to me, a couple of things that help. If you're somebody else who's writing poetry and you can write poetry in the company with the other person. So you too have somebody to talk with and somebody to give you some feedback. That's one thing. And then another thing is just to read. I mean, books of poetry teach people how to be poets more than any other force that I can think of. So I would recommend those two things. I think writing groups can be quite wonderful if you have strong writers and if there's a kind of equality in the level of talent and accomplishment. So, but I found that writing groups for me, I've been in some that were pretty large, say as many as 10 people, but I found that 3 people was pretty as much as I could stand to deal with. And I think my other writing proteges would say the same thing. More than 3 is too many all at once.
Matt, would you? Anyway, folks in the audience, please, remember that there is a space to ask questions, and we have our finalist poets here who are very eager to share their expertise, their life and experience as poets, working poets. There is a third question, also a comment from Sandra Treadway, and she writes, fiction writers get asked all the time how they write. Is there a time of day that works best? Do you try to write every day? Do you have a process that works for you, especially if you are writing to a deadline? And she says, I'm not sure poets are asked that very often. And is there a discipline to your writing process, or does writing poetry rely on moments of inspiration alone? So certainly very important questions. Well, David, I saw somewhere that you said in an interview, I believe, that you write every day. Is that right?
I do. And then I think after I put that in writing in an interview, I haven't been able to write every day for about 6 months now. So I'm being punished.
I mean, I think I wish I had the discipline to write every day. I told my students to tune in tonight, but I also am about to out myself because I definitely encourage them to develop a practice, right? I say poetry, and this sort of maybe speaks to the previous question too. I didn't have anybody specifically ask in the pandemic, but I'm teaching an intro to poetry class right now, and practice, process, product, right? Like just do the writing, do the thing, and then the process of workshop and revision and whatnot. And then if you're lucky, you get a product you can live with, right? And I think that for me, there's a combination, right, of what counts as inspiration is the question I think that's more interesting, right? I love prompts, I love questions. I love to read and sort of be inspired by the things I read, but that's those are things that you kind of can seek out. I've learned the muses are very busy. They're hanging out with Ben and David too, and you, Luisa. So I can't have them on retainer full time and wait for the muse to start writing, and so. How do I inspire myself? And I think that's where a poetics of attention of, how do you look out your window and, walk into the world? How do you look at a newspaper? My student, all of it, to sort of craft inspiration for myself. I'm not as disciplined about doing that as I should. And I can blame the pandemic right now. But the truth is, it's if you know where they sell discipline, I'd like to buy some.
Right.
Yeah.
I like what you say about the poetics of attention. Maybe we should just change some of the ways in which we give language to these things. I mean, discipline is an awful sound on the one hand, but there's also something kind of like, spiritual about it. So it's, again, this contradictory thing. Ben, do you have a response to that question about inspiration and process?
Yeah, I would certainly echo that. Sometimes my students who aren't familiar with poetry, right, they have this image in their mind of me at a Starbucks with a scarf, wrapped around myself, and my glasses are fogging up from the pumpkin spice chai, right? And then Zeus is up above me and lightning bolts my head. And then all of a sudden I just start hammering away with this beautiful line after line. And I really, really have to get them out of that mode and into the kind of craftsperson mode, right? This is just like if you're trying to, I said that I, wasn't a carpenter, but if I was trying to build a chair, right, I would learn how to build a chair and I would work on it every day, and it would be a really, really crappy chair, right? But over days, over time, I would get better and better and better. And so I kind of teach that imagination is very similar, right? It's a muscle. You have to work on it. Just like all of you were saying, you try and trap things in that sieve of your imagination constantly. You're kind of increasing the amount of surface area for luck to land on, right? Mm-hmm. And luck being that, very tricky muse, inspiration, etc.
Right. Well, anyway, I mean, the period of poets crafting poems with scarves around their necks in cafes is probably, not going to be happening for a while.
Exactly.
Fourth question from Sybil, and I think it's a really interesting question. She asks here, I really enjoyed listening to all of you this evening. Thank you. What did you hear in each other's work that perhaps you recognize in your own work, style, themes, or whatever?
Well, I felt a seriousness in the work of both poets here that almost immediately I honored that and felt really that I was with one of my own people in hearing those things. And I don't think that's necessarily a learned talent. I think it's something about the personality of the writer, that there is something there that needs to come out into language. And I feel honored when that works on my behalf with good results. I'm very grateful for that, but it doesn't always happen. So I feel like I appreciated what you accomplished, and that I think can help me try to accomplish more too.
I think kind of going off of that, David, I've been perusing both of your books, and certainly that idea of not just the seriousness too, but that very, the question or the connection between the self and the wider world, or the notion of the self as being a part of. And that there's an old chestnut that we kick around in the conversation of poetry, like, what is it for? Is it too political? Is it, is what's the job? And I feel like in both of these collections, the idea of the work of the poet is not to be separate from the world, but to sort of engage the world and to take the idea of world really broadly and seriously. And so I really appreciated that connection in both of your books.
Yeah, I think that was like the perfect answer, right? We're trying very hard to not be this kind of impartial outside observer, this kind of omniscient presence who sees everything very clearly, but we're rather more, implicated, right? We read a lot about family, tied to current events, right? It is very much a kind of witness, a kind of I'm in the mix implication, and less of that kind of, far away, omniscient, I can see exactly what's happening tone that I think we're all trying to get at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've read a lot of articles in the last couple of days since the Nobel Prize for Literature for Poetry was announced, Louise Glück. And I read in one of those articles, she was saying something about how when she was younger, this is a bad paraphrase, but the idea was that when she was younger, she thought that she would just, drop into this life of a poet, but didn't happen that way. So basically her conclusion was that you go live a life as fully as you can. You immerse yourself in that life, and then, you start connecting with that poetry, the world of words that your whole body also participates in because you have to live it. So I really appreciated reading that. I want to ask a question about, since all of you, I read your bios and you're also wildly prolific in so many genres. In fact, is it the Georgia Review? I have it somewhere here. I read your story, David, in the latest issue of the Georgia Review, the story None, which just arrived in the mailbox yesterday. So I'm like, oh, I'm doing a panel with David tomorrow. So can you talk about the distinctions between the genre and the genres? And also there's so much about interest about hybrid genres nowadays. What do you think about that? Or maybe what do you think about the ways in which you teach genre now, or how you feel your sense of genres helps you as a poet, or vice versa, whatever you're writing?
Well, it does help if your poetry just sort of shuts the door and says, "I'm not having anything else to do with you." You say, "Yeah, I'm going to write a story then," or "I've got a novel that'll keep me busy for a year." So I've always felt lucky to be able to accomplish something in those other genres, which is not to say that I'm great at any of them. But
You're quite modest.
I think that would be a great title for a story.
All right, let's write it. Well, Ben and Lauren, would you like to talk about the genre?
For sure. I love that concept of having lots and lots of irons in the fire, right? If, inspiration isn't hitting you in one genre, cross into a different one. I've become more and more fond of saying that in my own work, I try and be as disrespectful of genre as I possibly can be, right? My MFA is in fiction, right? But I'm teaching poetry, nonfiction, and right now I'm teaching a writing for video games class. So that's, scripts, right? So, the hands are in lots of different pies, or however that, everything goes. But there are, in my mind, core principles, right, that are really crossing from every single genre, right? You want your audience to be interested, engaged. We love reversal. We love veracity if it feels true. And of course, tension, conflict. Those are always, getting our attention, interest, etc.
It's funny because I love teaching other genres. I feel, I think the case with most of us, we come to writing through story, right? Through narrative. And so for me, it was much clearer for a long time how to talk about the mechanics of fiction, and because nonfiction is close enough that they have that connection, and I feel like poetry was more a thing that happened than I did, and so I had to really work harder to figure out how to explicate that to others. But I will say that I wish I wrote in other genres more than I do. My best friend is a novelist, Kathy Chung, and I was like, I wish I wrote fiction. She's like, I say I write bad fiction. She's like, no, you write unfinished fiction. And I think that's one of the things that's so different, between poetry and prose is the compression. The sheer volume of words is exhausting. It's like, I need some white space on this page. I'm writing lots of papers right now because I'm doing a PhD at the University of Virginia. And, I find myself for the first couple of years of that program, I would write a paragraph of a paper and then go to a different document. Like the accrued weight of multiple paragraphs was, I couldn't think anymore. And I would keep going back and trying to fix sentences, which is not how you write a 25-page paper, And so I do think that, the genre that I've been most, but and I have written in other genres. I think that the pathways of one's mind just moves differently with different rules. It's like writing in one form versus another. But I do a lot of interviews. I do interviews for The Fight and the Fiddle, and I did a lot of interviews for I'm Literate before, and for Guernica. And I love questions. I think questions. I have a lot of questions. I like asking people questions. I'm nosy about their interior lives and their writing practices, and I just want to have conversations. And so I think that for me, the interview is a genre with the foundation of curiosity and asking questions and not assuming a surface, but sort of looking constantly below it is a practice that just carries across the genres.
Mm-hmm. So sometimes the goal is not really arrival, but the experience of going through that and figuring out what else is uncovered. So I don't know if Ben, did you answer that? I forgot.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the different job, the video game writing from poetry.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So poets' attention spans sometimes, you know.
Sure.
To cultivate the poetics of attention. I have not seen any additional questions yet, but if you would like to just say a few closing words to our audience before I turn the virtual stage back over to Scott, would you say something in farewell this evening?
I would like to say, and I think some of you said this early on, and I should have, but I think the Library of Virginia is just a stellar institution to make this possible for us. And this is not my first time at this rodeo, and every time I've had something to do with the Library of Virginia, I've been happy about it. So I would say that. And I don't know how other libraries in the world are, but I do know that the Library of Virginia is one that I have very high regard for.
Yeah. I mean, I want to say again, thank you so much. It's an honor. I mean, you've heard the amazing work of the other two poets, and you know, I just think that we're lucky to be in a time where, even though we can be apart, you know, technology is connecting us, and that writing can connect us. So, you know, get those poets' books and read, and you can have friends at home in the books, right? And so that's just a wonderful portal to travel, to imagine, to be in community and in connection with others. Even though we can't really do that in person. And so I wish I were close to shake your hands and congratulate you and everything, but I'm really, really happy to have your work keep your company.
And then?
Yeah, I would definitely echo all that gratitude. I wish I could give everyone a real hug and not a virtual hug.
I'm going to give you an elbow. That's sort of
that's very wise.
Go buy their books. Wonderful, wonderful books. Amazing books, amazing poets. It's been such a privilege to have this conversation with you. Thank you so much. I hope we catch up soon in real time, in real space, and have coffee or something. So
thank you.
Turn this over now to Scott. Back to Scott. Thank you again.
Thank you, Luisa.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for tonight. It was really fascinating. I enjoyed hearing from all of you very much, and I hope that all of you that are watching at home or hopefully not in your cars or at a Starbucks or wherever have enjoyed it too. And you know, thank you again to everyone that supported the Literary Awards this year. Obviously, the library is very grateful for people that contribute to our work. Just as a reminder, if you'd like to make a contribution towards the challenge, you still can. There's still time. You can do so through the link or by calling 804-692-3592. Tomorrow night at 6 will be our nonfiction panel, hosted by Tracy Thomas, host of the Stacks podcast, with finalists Tressie McMillan Cotton, Andrea Dennis, Mariam Lane, and Eric Nielsen. And don't forget to tune in on Friday night for our COTS lecture in partnership with the VMFA, as well as Saturday night, where we get to announce the winners of this year's Literary Awards. And we hope you can join us for that virtual celebration with Adriana Trigiani and Douglas Brinkley as our featured speaker. Thank you again, panelists. Thank you again, Dr. Igloria. I really enjoyed tonight. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Bye.